Lawyers have read it. What was your oh shit moment in court? Sat in on a personal injury case where the plaintiff broke their leg in an accident and had a doctor on the stand as an expert. The woman's lawyer begins questioning the doctor about their experience with leg injuries. He was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the area. She asks if has ever treated a tibula fracture. The leg bones are tibia and fibula, to which he only answers no. Then she starts grilling him with questions about the tibula. After about 6-7 questions she asks, how did you get a medical license and have been able to practice medicine this long if you've never treated a tibula fracture? And begins a small rant about going after his credentials and those that gave it to him, to which he simply responds, there is no bone named the tibula. The lawyer became beet red and everyone in the room tried their best to keep from laughing, including the judge. I was representing a plaintiff in a hit-and-run case. Plaintiff is testifying and is, despite me preparing them for several hours the previous day, an absolutely terrible witness for her own case. Like, she couldn't even identify the street she was crossing when she was hit by the car. It was a major highway and we had gone through the sequence of events countless times the day before the hearing. The oh shit moment came during cross-examination. Defense counsel pulls out a picture of my client dressed up and ready to hit the club, which was posted to Facebook the day after the alleged accident. I, thinking quickly, object because the timestamp refers to when it was posted, not when it was taken. Defense counsel showed the picture to my client and asked her when the picture was taken. Sure enough, they say it was taken the day after the accident when she was supposedly in unbearable pain. Oh. Shit. When I was in college, I was a bailiff. Guy's on trial for murder. First witness testified that she saw the defendant shoot the victim. Second witness states the same. Police officer testimony is that he arrived at the scene and defendant was there holding the gun. Coroner testimony is that the first bullet hit the victim in the arm, the second bullet hit the victim in the torso and the third bullet hit the victim in the heart, which was the fatal shot. UK, bear with me on this one. I was in court listening to the most boring old defense lawyer you've ever seen. He was questioning the arresting officer in the case. It was drugs or something like that. Anyway, he's droning on about every little detail and the magistrate was constantly telling him to hurry along. The arresting officer was getting noticeably annoyed and the room became empty pretty quick. Everyone was very bored and annoyed. He was droning about details that I'm not sure anyone was really listening to or cared about. Anyway, he went over arrest times and the likes with the officer, time he admitted the suspect and released him. He had bored the officer to the point where he was barely paying attention. So he was admitted in at 21:45 on the night in question? Yes, released the night after. Yes, that was what? Just after 10 p.m.? Yes, what time after 10? I don't know. 10:15 maybe. So my client was detained for more than 24 hours. The penny dropped. The officer let his guard down and had revealed he kept the defendant for more than 24 hours, which is the max time for detention in the UK. The defense rested and the magistrate threw the case out immediately. Well played, sir, well played. I think this qualifies, though it wasn't me, that was the lawyer. Got called for jury duty. Was at the jury selection phase, and they asked if anyone here thinks they should not. Blah blah. Defendant was in the room. I raised my hand. The defending lawyer looked at me like, oh, this ought to be good, and asked me to explain. I suggested I tell them in private. He insisted I tell the courtroom. I said okay, I probably shouldn't be on this jury because I was on a previous jury for this man which returned a guilty verdict. Lawyer's face went oh shit. Commotion and a wait while they looked up records. Yep, verified. Whole jury was now tainted. Everyone goes home, and they start over. I was involved in a pretty messy custody case. The other party was a mess and had kept the child from my client for a few weeks. Op was playing lots of stupid games and kept requesting continuances. I requested a drug test, which the judge ordered. However, the op didn't show up for it. To clarify, he did show up, he just stood in front of the toilet for literally 2 hours and claimed he couldn't pee. I was representing the plaintiff, so the burden was on me. I called multiple witnesses that testified to the defendant's drug use. So, opposing counsel decides to call their client for direct examination and asks, you don't use heroin and crack, right? That is, for the non-lawyers, a very stupid question for many reasons. Especially considering his client didn't show up for his drug test. However, I fully expected the defendant to just lie and say he was clean. After the question was asked, there was a really long pause and the defendant said, yes, I do both of those drugs. My head almost exploded. I didn't ask any questions on cross-examination because I didn't want to muddy the waters. I won, and the child is doing great. Not mine but my boss's one. She had to defend a small-time delinquent as duty solicitor. Before going to court he asked her what he should do. She explained to him if he was cooperative and truthful his sentence would be milder. After hearing the case the judge asked him if he wanted to add something. He got up and explained to the judge, "My counsel told me to be truthful, so I wanted to tell you that I not only did the robbery I'm being heard for but also several others in the region." He continued to admit to several robberies that had been unsolved yet, and everyone, even the state attorney, were face-palming. Literally the first thing I ever did was just a law student intern. Guy has a legit defense on a drug possession case. Drugs found in a jacket. Guy wasn't wearing jacket. They were going to have a very difficult time proving the jacket belonged to my guy. Had a long meeting with client. Explained everything. Client was excited. Day of the preliminary hearing, Guy shows up and sits down directly in front of the officer who arrested him, while wearing the jacket in question, the exact same jacket we were going to say they couldn't prove belonged to him. Was in court for a directions hearing. The judge was already in a bad mood and asked why we were here for such a seemingly pointless litigation without giving details. He was right. The barrister starts to make our case, and I am taking notes about areas we need to further explore when I hear, "Excuse me, why were you so rude to me?" The client, who had been told to not come, had come to court that day and was evidently incensed by the judge questioning the merit of their case. They berated the judge for about 3 minutes, with me and my co-counsel first stunned and then trying to shut them up, before he adjourned the hearing. The case did not go very well, to my client's surprise and fury. Big sigh, not me but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client, I think in a hearing for a restraining order against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately angrily shouted, "She can't prove it, I didn't leave a mark, thanks, buddy." 2 moments in a DUI trial, one passenger is testifying for driver's sobriety when the DA asks her, "You keep saying he was sober, but are you even tips certified, a course for bartenders so they can recognize drunk patrons?" She was. 2. The head of the county's blood lab accidentally admitted he cranked the sensitivity of his machines way up because he was experimenting. Not a lawyer, but a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies throwing eggs at cars. We were only actually in the courtroom for our sentencing, there was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he is a good kid who doesn't normally do things like this. Lie, we used to do it all the time, and that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wish there was a video of my other friend and I sitting in the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased, and she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Obligatorial, but in a pre-mediation meeting once for an uninsured motorist claim, an insured had alleged that she couldn't walk without the aid of a cane and had a pronounced limp after an accident due to a low back injury and a shooting pain in her right leg. The doctor notes didn't support anything but a subjective injury after a few weeks, but she was still treating 2 years later and going to new physicians. So, we had her followed covertly to see if she was really using the cane and had a limp, etc. We got footage of her carrying like 4 grocery bags in each arm to her car in a Walmart parking lot, walking perfectly fine. When she got to her car, she even opened the trunk of her SUV without putting any bags down and lifted the gate with her knee partway. Her elderly mother was with her using a particularly decorative purple cane with a flower pattern on it. They followed her to a doctor appointment an hour later and she's on video using her mother's cane and walking with a limp that would give Forrest Gump a run for his money. Never did follow up on how that played in the mediation, but I can only imagine it gave some attorney an oh shit moment. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a character witness for my childhood dog in a civil trial between our neighbors and my parents. Opposing counsel was questioning me, I wasn't even out of elementary school at the time, and he asked if our dog was aggressive. She was a Rottweiler and very loving and incredibly protective of me and my siblings. His final question to me is one I will never forget. He asked, "Did your father tell you what to say before you came into court today?" I responded yes. Then he asked, "What did he tell you to say?" I said the truth. Now I was too young to remember the courtroom reaction, but according to my father the judge audibly guffawed and the opposing counsel lost all the wind out of his sails. I was at a hearing arguing that my client was wrongfully terminated because the employer failed to abide by the proper procedures. During the hearing, a witness for the employer tried to offer documents that were fraudulently altered in order to make it look like the proper procedure was followed. I noticed the alteration. Opposing counsel quickly got that witness out of the room, and after a quick adjournment, my client got a large settlement. Opposing counsel was a nightmare. Everything late, his work was extremely subpar, and so forth. Accused me of lying multiple times when he had dropped the ball. During another hearing in which he did another dumb move, judge says, "I'm glad you are the last case on the call, and all of the other attorneys have left the room." So they aren't here to hear me say that you are a terrible attorney. I'm not the lawyer, but it's a classic live TV moment in Quebec. The guy is old. Must be at least 90. He's being sued by his daughters, who accuse him of sexual assault. This is on live TV, on one of Quebec's biggest news network. Translation by U6 Data is better than mine. I'm not guilty. I've never slept with my daughters. I never beat my daughters. I never touched my daughters. Except for one time at the cabin. I swear, you can probably hear his lawyer face-palming hard. Here is the video in French. Come watch. Watched 0Q. During jury selection. I can't be a juror due to the fact I'm kinda racist. Not a lawyer, but I had a big oh shit moment. I was in court for driving while suspended in a county and in front of a judge that were both notorious for putting people who did that in jail. My license wasn't supposed to be suspended, a pencil pusher forgot to press a button or something and it never got unsuspended after the time was up. I had proof of this, but I was still really nervous. The guy who went up to the judge before me walked to the table where we were supposed to stand, sat down, and put his feet up on the table. The judge asked him what he was doing and he gave a flippant answer and basically told the judge to get fucked. This seriously pissed the judge off. The judge went off on this guy and the guy gave everything right back to him, pissing him off more and more. The judge ended up jailing him for contempt and had the bailiff cuff the guy and put him in a chair off to the side to await the marshals who would transport him to the jail. My name gets called. The judge is looking at me like I'm fresh meat and he is a great white shark. I'm already thinking to myself, okay, if this judge puts you in jail, run over and beat the shit out of the guy that pissed the judge off so badly. He's why you're going to jail. The judge looks down at his paperwork and back at me and says, "You're Mr. My last name?" I said, "Yes sir." He said, "Yeah. We were talking about you earlier. I'm going to void your arrest and dismiss this case. Your license was supposed to be valid and you shouldn't be here." I let out a huge sigh. The judge asked me if I was okay and I said I had been a bit worried, especially given the guy that was right before me in line. The judge said don't worry about him, he won't be seeing anything that isn't behind bars for about 90 days. And laughed. Watching a hearing when the defendant said I did stab her. But it was a gentle stabbing. Not a lawyer but shared an oh shit moment with one. I hit something in the road and had a tire blow out while driving home from MEPS, hit a concrete divider and wound up rolling my car. No injuries and no other vehicles involved. Received a reckless driving ticket that the officer told me was just procedure and not to be concerned with. Fast forward a month and I'm in court with my lawyer who plans on pointing out this ticket could prevent my hardship enlistment. He's not expecting it to take more than a minute because the issuing officer and prosecutor are on board. Q group oh shit moment. I'm fourth on the docket and the judge has just handed out maximum sentences for all three prior defendants. People are getting 6 to 12 months, having licenses revoked, for little stuff. Prosecutor gets screamed at the instant he opens his mouth. Police officer is told to shut up while answering a question the judge asked. My lawyer is told he's about to be held in contempt. I'm starting to think I'm gonna get 3 squares and a cot, just not where I planned on getting them. The judge told me to step forward while shuffling my case paperwork and my lawyer just gave me a look that said, "I'm so sorry." Case dismissed in the interest of justice, and if any more idiots waste his time with nonsense like this again, everyone is spending the night in county. Medical malpractice defense lawyer here representing hospitals' doctors. This was not my oh shit moment but plaintiff's oh shit moment. For context, usually at trial, both plaintiff and defendant will have an expert physician testify as to their opinion to whether the doctor/hospital performed everything correctly. I thoroughly researched plaintiff's expert, who was in OB/GYN baby delivery, and found out he had been suspended a number of times for his own botched deliveries and giving incorrect medical testimony to help plaintiff's cases. During the actual day of trial, turns out he was not licensed to practice medicine independently without supervision from another physician, and he was 1 year into his 3-year suspension. Plaintiff's lawyers had no idea about their own expert's background and they just sat there with a blank look on their face. Needless to say, during cross-examination, we destroyed his credibility and won at trial. I was prosecuting a contempt action in family court, something that basically never works, and everyone in the room could tell I was winning. The other side was unprepared out of arrogance and I was basically ripping this guy to shreds on cross-examination, which his lawyer didn't even think would happen, because he expected the case to be dismissed. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled for me and stated that she found the defendant's testimony to be untrustworthy. I was shocked at winning a contempt trial to begin with, but then this exchange happened. Defendant's attorney: Your Honor, now that you have found my client's testimony to be untrustworthy, I am requesting a continuance in order to prepare further witnesses. This concept is shocking in and of itself, because to even think you can bring more witnesses after you rest your case is laughable. Judge, you had your shot and you missed. Counsel. Defendant's attorney: Your Honor, there was no way I could have anticipated that you'd find my client's testimony untrustworthy, and as such, I didn't have the opportunity to prepare other witnesses in support of his position. Judge, that may be an argument for your carrier, Counsel, but it holds no water with me. See you this afternoon for sentencing. For those who didn't pick up on it, the judge basically told the lawyer on the record in front of his client that she expects him to get sued for malpractice because he fucked up so royally. That shit was mind-blowing on multiple levels. Not in court but a deposition. Plaintiff in a sexual harassment case that was suspected to be paid role play with her boss kept a very detailed sex diary on her work computer. At one point she was asked to read from the diary for the record and asked if she had written the accounts and if they were true. She was asked at several points if she wanted her new husband to leave the room while she did this, but declined. Let's just say it was extremely kinky. She confirmed it was true, and the only mention of her now husband was that he was boring in bed, but she was going to marry him because she couldn't get her first, second or third choice. He ended up leaving on his own after she read that part out and confirmed it was him she was writing about. Not a lawyer, but I witnessed my ex-wife try to argue with the judge that she couldn't be accused of kidnapping our daughter because our daughter was legally emancipated. Not a spoiler, she wasn't at the time of the kidnapping. My ex had legal statutes written on small sheets of paper she had torn out of books in the jail library, and she kept arguing with the judge after being told that none of it mattered. After the fifth time my ex interrupted the judge with her nonsense, the judge slammed her hands down, stood up, leaned over her bench, and told my ex that she had been a juvenile court judge for 20 years and was well aware of the statutes. If she interrupted one more time, then she would be held in contempt and spend several months more in jail. My lawyer held up his folder in front of his face to hide his grin during this exchange. I walked out with full legal and physical custody of my daughter, court-supervised visitation for my ex, and a full restraining order. I was interning during law school prosecuting domestic violence cases. The deputy DA asked me to talk for the first time during a guy's arraignment, for beating his wife. An arraignment is when the defendant hears the charges against them and pleads guilty or not guilty basically. When the judge calls on me to speak, I got insanely nervous, and told the defendant that his charge carried a maximum penalty of 30 years, when it was actually 30 days. He freaks out, the crowd some in the gallery where his family and friends gasps. The judge basically stops me and says, "I think you mean 30 days, counselor." After which everyone, including the defendant, laughed at me. Edit: because a lot of you are worried about this, the evidence was pretty weak and the facts did not bear charging anything other than the lowest level misdemeanor, which, in conjunction with this being a first offense, meant that we were seeking two things primarily: counseling, anger management classes, and probation. The intent being that any future problems can hopefully be avoided, and if not, we could stick the defendant with a harsh punishment the next time when we'd hopefully have better facts evidence. Two high-profile men on trial for killing another guy. Both ex-cops from the 80s, a notorious time in our country for police corruption. The first trial had been aborted after one barrister had made a casual comment that the other accused had already killed 2 or 3 people. Second attempt was 6 weeks into an expected 10-week retrial. All of the networks and papers were covering this trial. The gallery was always packed with law students because of the many uniquely horrific aspects of the trial. So, we're 6 weeks into the retrial. Defense 1 gets up to cross-examine a witness. "Did you know of accused murderer 1? "Yes, he was a cop and a drug dealer in the 80s. The court basically exploded. The judge immediately issued a non-publication order, meaning there was an embargo on all information from that day. It was early afternoon, but the judge excused the jury for the day, then spent the next day and a half deliberating over whether to abandon the trial over halfway through, and for the second time. The best oh shit moments are when your opposing counsel or opposing client says or does something that wins the case for you. True, in civil cases you usually know what will happen ahead of time, but in my state, discovery in smaller civil cases is more limited, and clients don't always want to spend $30,000 when we can get the same result for $10,000. In an adverse possession case, the witness only needed to say, "I used that area as my backyard," and I fully expected him to say this. It would harm my case, but I knew I could get around it. When asked about his use of the area, he said, "No, I never really went back there, didn't use it at all." Lost the case for the other side, and I could barely keep a straight face. It was completely opposite of what the witness had told opposing counsel off the record. Apparently the under penalty of perjury made him change his story. I had another case about losing multi-unit dwelling insurance because a guy's place was a fire hazard. I asked him if his personal insurer knew about the fire hazard. "Yeah, and the jerks canceled my policy." I also love it when I have a difficult party on the other side and the judge rips them a new one. I had a convoluted case with a lot of parties about nothing at all. The plaintiff was heinous. The 6 or 7 attorneys were working out calendars with the judge when the plaintiff starts yelling at her attorney from across the courtroom because she didn't like that he had conceded some little non-issue. Judge told her to sit down and shut up. I was sad that the case settled because she would have been amazing on the stand. Not exactly in court. But I was defending a juvenile robbery case, where there was very little evidence. There was supposed to be 2 guys, but they only picked up this one kid. He had no stolen property on him. He was picked up like outside his own house, wearing different clothes than the victim had initially said. This kid was on the honor roll at school, his family seemed kind and more involved, he wrote poetry and played instruments. I actually believed it was a legit mistaken identity case. I went to meet with one of the kid's mentors for a character reference. And he exactly matched the description of the other robber. I was the dumbass that almost screwed myself. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I accepted the first plea, which almost always carries probation, but my plea didn't have that condition. When it came time to accept the second plea, the prosecutor didn't include probation because she assumed my first charge put me on probation. She said as much to the judge, and me being a big dummy almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed my shoulder and, I shit you not, told me to shut the fuck up. She doesn't know. I'm not a lawyer, but a court case I was involved with went this way. My ex-mill was a crazy bitch. Me and my wife at the time had cut her off almost completely. Every one in a hole she would give in and let her mom visit, which always turned out badly. Eventually we got divorced and I got full custody. Mill went nuts and decided to sue me for custody. I looked over the law, and for any form of visitation or custody you need to have had contact in the last 6 months, and she hadn't seen them for over a year. So we go to court. I can't afford a lawyer, but the law was pretty clear. She goes through 3 lawyers, each of them quit in turn. So she finally winds up representing herself. During the last hearing she was talking to the judge and said something to the effect of, I don't want to get custody of them, I just want to be able to visit. The judge then asked her point blank, this is a custody hearing. Are you telling me you no longer want to get custody? She said yes, and the judge dismissed the case immediately. Staff attorney for a judge. Had a domestics hearing over some issue, final divorce hearing, custody mod, IDG. The mother's attorney is a prolific asshole in the community. Puts on a big dog and pony show because clients like to pay for billboard, legal crap. Pretty bad reputation in our legal community. X200B father's attorney, young attorney, mom's attorney, old guy stands up and is attempting to examine his witness. Mom's attorney stands up and objects to literally every sentence the father's attorney starts. Judge just kind of sits hoping it will calm down, tells mom's attorney to sit down. He continues, and just before the judge finds him in contempt, father's attorney turns and says, you may think because you're older than me, you can treat me with disrespect. You can hoop and holler all you want, but you won't do it at my expense. If you want to put on a show, go join the fucking circus. Attorney's name. Unfortunately I'm not allowed to say too much, but basically, on charges of growing marijuana, stated he was growing herbs for medicine and gestured air quotes with his hands and then whispered, I kid you not, marijuana. Bro. Represented a pro bono client that had just turned 18 and was charged with serious property damage. I walk into his bail hearing and the judge looks at him and goes, I knew you'd be back as an adult. The judge then turns to me and says, Counselor, you may want to learn about your client's history. No bail. Added to answer some of the questions below. 1. I considered it to be extremely inappropriate and objected to it. Juvenile records are sealed for a reason. The judge overruled the objection but made sure to articulate that his denial of bail was for reasons related to the instant case. 2. The firm I was at had a pro bono program and worked with the Public Defender Service in the area. 3. The judge at the bail hearing wasn't the judge for all other hearings in the case. He just happened to be the one handling bail hearings that afternoon. Null, but have been on a number of juries. Kid was being charged with arson in his high school. First sign of trouble, prosecutor is trying to get the investigator to say something specific. Note this was a fire investigator. What did you see? It was a bathroom. Anything else? Sink? What else did you see? Mirrors. What else? Trash can. Anything in the trash can? Paper towels. Anything unusual about the paper towels? They were burned? Thank you. Then she calls the co-conspirator who has made a plea deal, who according to opening statements will testify that the kid defendant started the fire. The kid spoke and acted like a stoner. What happened? We had some aftershave. We got some paper towels and poured the aftershave on the towels. Then I lit them. I mean he lit them, Your Honor. I'd like a recess. End of trial. Not a lawyer, but was working at the jail when an inmate came back from court and immediately went on suicide watch. Apparently he was up for a plea deal and was only looking at 6 months, but started questioning some of the facts, which led in a ton of previously denied evidence. This new evidence linked him to 6 bees and rapes. He walked out of court facing a 99-year sentence, which he was certain to get. All because he opened his mouth. The lawyers were arguing over a pair of the victim's panties. He apparently chimed in with something he shouldn't have known. That brought in evidence that was previously inadmissible to not only this case, but 5 other burglary rapes. Evidence, which by the transport officer's words, good enough to metaphorically fuck him for 100 years. I'm not an attorney, but a reporter whose beat is the county courthouse, so I've had plenty of these moments happen in front of me. A guy was convicted of attempting to murder several police officers. At his sentencing, the prosecutor revealed the defendant got a prison tattoo while he was awaiting sentencing of a tombstone with the names of all the cops he attempted to kill. But the defendant still had the audacity to beg for a lenient sentence. He got a few hundred years in jail. Added clarification in the 3rd paragraph. Not a lawyer, but I got in enough trouble in my teens to know what a judge doesn't like. Uncle's father decide they're going to conserve my grandmother and put her in a secured perimeter memory facility. In reality, they just wanted to piss away her $20 million estate. We end up in court with our lawyers. One thing I know about most judges' courtrooms. They want to be revered like a church. No talk back, no talking out of turn, wear a suit, even if it's a $20 Goodwill suit. Father, uncles all show up. All of them spend about an hour bad-mouthing me. I'm keeping my mouth shut, looking at my feet. One of my uncles tries to examine me, I just keep my mouth shut until the judge tells him he's not a lawyer, and I'm not examination. None of them are well-dressed, sneakers, dirty sweatpants. My uncle who's the ringleader decides to start talking over his own lawyers. My lawyer makes some comment, the judge starts talking to her and my uncle's lawyer says something like, "Now hold on ladies, all they had to do was keep their mouths shut, and not tell their lawyers how to do their job and they would have won." They pretty much handed Grandma and I the win. Do you see the defendant here in court? Witness victim looks at each jury member, then everyone in the audience. Nope. Judge hides his face behind file folder. Are you sure? Maybe over on this side. Witness looks confused. I'm not sure. I point at defendant. Maybe over at this table by that lawyer. Yeah, maybe. Keep in mind defendant victim knew each other very well. Edit format and spelling. Edit to I use the defendant's name, and he was in plain view from the witness stand. I think the witness was just nervous because he was buddies with the defendant. Yes, my questions couldn't have been more leading. OC was fine with me creating apathy in the minds of the jury. I was just interning in court during law school, but I'm a lawyer now. Fight in a club, someone had broken someone else's jaw, and had 6 friends with him that insisted he had been identified wrongly because he never have a beard and the victim said he had a beard. They used a very specific phrasing to the tune of "my friend doesn't have facial hair because he is a professional in the food industry and it would go against the regulations." After 3 of the witnesses had repeated the same exact phrasing, the judge stopped one to ask if he knew what a couple of the terms in that line meant, and the witness couldn't explain it. Defense lawyer got busted for instructing the witnesses. She'd also gotten the defendant to reject a plea deal that exchanged prison time for a fine and community service. Lawyer here. I had a pre-trial conference at 9 a.m. at a court about 2 hours away. So I wake my ass up super early to drive in shitty weather to the conference. I get there and we're waiting for the other in-town attorney. All the while I'm grumbling to myself about how I'm from out of town and I can still make it on time. Finally the court calls the other attorney's office and gets a receptionist who tells us through tears that other attorney passed away the night before. Needless to say, I was just happy to still be alive and we rescheduled for a few months later. We were just sitting around because of delay of some sort. Over the course of about 5 minutes, about 8 heavily armored sheriff's deputies quietly shuffled into the room and everyone was told they need to sit real fucking still until told otherwise. Another 3 big boys lead in the defendant. Small Italian-American gentleman in shackles. He was up on a few pretty boring fraud charges. I'm guessing he had friends on the outside who wanted to speak to him. X200B also, there was the guy who called the male judge ma'am. He was funny. Step-parent adoption I was handling in law school. I was appearing before the court on a motion, literally just submitting a written brief and summing up my argument so the judge could think about it in chambers for a few weeks when the judge stopped me halfway through my explanation of the motion, said I'm ready to sign the final order, and executed it right there at the bench. The client happened to come along for this one, and broke down happy crying before we left the courtroom. I felt 10 feet tall. I'm only in law school at the moment, but I saw this happen when I was watching a summary non-jury trial in my hometown about 3 years ago. It was a domestic abuse case, with the partner of the accused being examined. The prosecutor asked her to identify the person who she accused of attacking her and she refused, or said something along the lines of she didn't remember. She was clearly scared of the guy, but it seemed like she was trying to protect him on the stand for whatever reason. Well, that was ruined after the second time she tried to protect him and refused to identify, as the accused shouted out, "I'm right here, you stupid bitch." I posted this story before, but it's really good and many of you may like it. X200B. My wife is a court clerk. She told me a story a court clerk friend of hers told her. DA has a shaky case at best against a defendant. Police were trying to pin a drug charge on a guy with literally zero evidence. The report read that a certain amount of weed and meth were found and recovered in the defendant's car, but the evidence was lost. Guy maintains his innocence and has no priors. The defense attorney is destroying the officers on the stand for inconsistencies between their accounts and poor documentation on the official police report. The prosecution's ace in the hole was a part of the police report that reads something to the effect that the police K-9 said there was marijuana and meth in the car. Rather than saying something like the police K-9 alerted the officers to the presence of drugs, it left the defense attorney no choice but to call the police K-9 to the stand to confirm its testimony. DA drops the case. It's hard to call stuff in court oh shit moments most of the time because generally you know what's coming. Even in criminal defense. I had some flubs early in my solo practice that more boiled down to lack of experience. But going for things that actually happened in court, I will go a little lighter than some of my fellow practitioners here. Closing argument in an assault case. I've learned to grow comfortable with my speaking style, and part of that is to cut loose a bit when it is appropriate. So I make light of some of the state's allegations given the testimony by the prosecuting witness. There is one guy on the jury panel that thinks I'm just hilarious. I had to wait for him to stop laughing. The oh shit moment? When the jurors came back to return a verdict, the same Rotflof guy was elected foreman by the other jurors. Verdict was not guilty. I was the defendant, representing the nonprofit that I volunteered for. The plaintiff was a 60-something grandma who was looking for a retirement settlement after falling out of her jacked-up pickup truck in our parking lot. The premise of her case was that our parking lot was in bad shape and that she fell into a pothole and broke her leg, which resulted in her having to take Coumadin and diminished her enjoyment of salads at the Friday night fish fry. No, really. It was going along fine, until my lawyer put up a photo of the pothole, taken the day of the incident, filled to the brim with water, after a recent rain. He asked the lady if she had gotten her foot wet, to which she replied that she couldn't recall. He talked a little more about how perhaps if her foot wasn't wet, it might have been because she fell out of the truck and didn't really fall into the pothole. He asked again if her foot was wet, and she affirmed that yes, her foot was wet. The oh shit moment came when he went back to his desk, flipped through her deposition and read the part where she was extremely adamant that her foot wasn't wet. Then he did some fancy legal stuff, the case was thrown out and I went back to work. Not a lawyer. Wife is, but she was just watching. Making his statement before the sentencing, the defendant, who molested a stepdaughter, her friend and a niece, pulled a knife from God knows where, and stabbed himself twice before getting wrestled to the ground. How he got it through the metal detector, no one knows. He lived through that but died 2 months later in prison of natural causes. Null. But I was on a jury once for a murder trial. Got selected and the trial started almost immediately. Man was on charged with murdering his neighbor. They made their opening statements, there was even a bloody note. It wasn't terribly long but they clearly put a lot of effort into their strategies and were ready for battle. First witness was called, it was the son of the man on trial. I forget the first question but it didn't matter, he immediately broke down crying and invoked his Fifth Amendment right. Everyone freaks out. Judge and lawyers were like WTF. Jury had no clue what was going on but we were quickly ushered out immediately after that. Few minutes later it was explained to us what happened. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecutor must have suspected that the father was taking the fall for the son who actually murdered the neighbor. Rather than risk losing, there was a mistrial while they sorted out who to actually charge and try. Edit. Destiny of Doors provided a succinct explanation of the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides that you cannot be forced to provide testimony that could be used to prosecute you for a crime. Not oh shit bad, oh shit I can't believe she said that. First jury trial, pretty serious charges. I'm cross-examining the alleged victim, and in answering my question she says, oh yeah, I lie all the time. Needless to say, I won that trial. My ex forgot why she was in court. Not a lawyer, but fully 2 years after we dated, a crazy ex got a restraining order on me as revenge for saying her tattoos sucked. She said I'd sexually assaulted her and threatened to rape her. We go to court, she tells her side, judge picks at a couple holes in her story, then asks her per the law on restraining orders how she feels I am a threat to her safety, security, and privacy. Nobody should be able to say that about my tattoos. The fucking idiot just finished saying I was a crazed sexual predator, and then completely forgot. Sat in the public gallery at a bail hearing for a man accused of heinous crimes against a very, very young female relative. The judge started laying out the conditions of bail, and one of them was to surrender his passport. Man turned to his attorney and said, loudly, words to the effect of, "But you said I could fly back to my home country." The judge stopped himself, and revoked the man's bail. X200B edit this post brought to you by the words flight and risk. Also, his home country was out of reach of extradition. Edit again, this was not in the USA. Every country has foreigners. My client fell asleep during his custody trial. Between that and him testing positive for marijuana on the day of trial after he made a big deal accusing his ex of using drugs, she tested clean. I was so happy to be done with that case. I have another one that I've just remembered representing a guy accused of housebreaking. Managed to persuade the prosecutor that they couldn't prove it, so they dropped the case at the intermediate diet procedural hearing before the case called in court. Headed downstairs to the cells to break the good news to my client, who was remanded in custody. Have an idle glance at the details of the charge while I'm waiting for the cell staff to bring him out. The house that was broken into was my then next-door neighbor. Grimacing face, grimacing face, grimacing face. Client was delighted that he was getting out. Him, "What cheers pal, you're the man, can't wait to get out, me no see that place you definitely didn't break into? I live next door, so gonna leave my house and car alone please?" Him, "I sure pal, me and the boys go up there stealing all the time." "What car do you drive?" I told him what kind of car it was. Needless to say, my car was broken into about 3 weeks later. Unamused face. Was in court going against a pro se plaintiff. He asked if I could argue his side of the case to the judge too. It's tough being a pro se plaintiff unfamiliar with the legal system, and I legitimately felt bad for him, so I just politely explained that it would be a conflict of interest. "So, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a forensic case manager for an alternative to incarceration program. Basically our program accepts clients who have severe mental illness, and instead of going to jail, they're mandated to mental health substance abuse treatment instead, and my job is to follow them throughout the mandate, and be the point person for the court and their therapists. We go to court with them and talk with their lawyers and judge and provide a psychological evaluation. I have many, many stories and only been here about a year. This one guy we had to stop working with even though we initially accepted him into our program. He was eligible for inpatient residential treatment because he was very sick and a violence risk. We referred him to places, and got a call from one saying they interviewed him, but they were rejecting him. Why? When asked to describe himself, he laughed and said, "I'm the murdering type." Yeah, residential facilities don't like hearing that, but... Okay, one more. Our judge in our treatment court is really great. He's understanding that clients have relapses, and instead of going straight to jail for violating their plea, he'll give them a warning or give them more time on their mandate. Usually, when clients are respectful and don't say dumb things. This guy, an old guy, at least 60, charged for selling his meds, comes up positive for cocaine after a couple months of his mandate. Okay, that's fine, we'll work with that. Unfortunately for him, when the judge asked about his urine positive and what happened, he said, "I was out partying, there was drugs, I wanted drugs." No remorse. He was made to go to more intense substance abuse treatment and added time to his mandate. Reposting myself from years ago story from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court, don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand, and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom, seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charges dropped. As he was mentally adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge facepalmed on that one. Was getting an expungement for a guy who had really turned his life around. This was gonna help him get a job as a coach at a small university. I'm in a very conservative jurisdiction. Client openly and voluntarily, without even the slightest prompting, admits to smoking pot. Expungement was granted, but there was a long lecture that made it seem like it was not going to be granted.